For 35 years, he sent human beings into space. His name was never on the screen. His face was never in the crowd. His family watched every launch on television and looked for him, and never once found him. Then his granddaughter wrote 4 words on a school assignment that changed everything. And Stephen Colbert turned a screen around, and a studio full of people finally saw the man who had been there the whole time. It was a Tuesday night at the Late Show. Early November in New York, the kind of cold that arrives with intention, the city sharpened by it, everyone moving with purpose. Inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, the lights were warm and the band was playing something easy and swinging, and the audience was settled into the particular comfort of people who have come in from the cold and found exactly what they needed on the other side of the door. Stephen walked out to his mark, and the room gave him what it always gave him: immediate, generous, the specific warmth of an audience that has been coming back for years and means it every time. The monologue landed. The energy was high. It was exactly the kind of Tuesday night that television is supposed to produce and usually doesn't quite manage. Nobody in that room was thinking about a rocket. Nobody was thinking about 7 astronauts. Nobody was thinking about a man who had spent 35 years making sure other people came home safely and had never once been asked to take a bow. That was about to change. The guest that night was not the kind of name that generates pre-show social media coverage. He was not attached to a franchise or a controversy or a cultural moment. He was a 71-year-old retired NASA aerospace engineer named Gerald Ackafer, and the reason he was on the show at all was a school assignment. Specifically, a 3rd-grade classroom in Houston, Texas, 4 months earlier. A teacher named Ms. Reyes had asked her students to write 1 paragraph about what their family members did for work. Most kids wrote about doctors and teachers and truck drivers and restaurant owners, the visible jobs, the ones with titles that explained themselves. Gerald's granddaughter, Maya, age 8, had sat at her desk for a long time, her pencil moving slowly, then stopping, then moving again. What she turned in read in its entirety. My grandpa worked at NASA for a long time. I don't know exactly what he did, but I know it was important because whenever a rocket went up on TV, he got very quiet and looked at his hands. I think everyone should know his name, but I don't know how to tell them. Ms. Reyes had read it 3 times. Then she had taken a photograph of it and sent it to a friend who worked in media, who sent it to someone else, who sent it to the Late Show's booking team, where a producer named David had read it at his desk on a Wednesday morning and sat very still for a moment before picking up the phone. Gerald had said yes eventually after David called 4 times. He had said yes not because he wanted attention, but because Maya had asked him to. Because she had said at 8 years old, with the particular certainty of children who have decided something, "Grandpa, I want people to know." He had been unable to say no to that. He wore a dark navy blazer over a light blue dress shirt, dark slacks, simple black shoes. His hair was silver and close-cut. His hands, large, careful, precise, rested on his thighs as the production assistant walked him to the green room. He looked at everything with the calm, systematic attention of an engineer. What is here? How does it work? What is its function? He accepted the offer of water. He looked at the television monitor showing the live feed from the stage and watched Stephen work with the focused interest of someone evaluating a system in operation, checking its tolerances, nodding where it was stressed, where it was performing as designed. "He's good," he said to the production assistant. "Not a compliment exactly, an assessment." "He is," she said. "He listens," Gerald said. "That's harder than the talking." Stephen had read Maya's paragraph 6 times. It was printed on a single sheet of paper in his folder, between his research notes and his questions. He had underlined 1 sentence. "I think everyone should know his name, but I don't know how to tell them." He had a plan for that. He had not told Gerald about the plan. The first 8 minutes of the interview were warm and careful, and moved at the pace of a man who chose his words the way he chose everything, with precision, with an understanding that the wrong one in the wrong place could have consequences. Stephen asked about NASA. Gerald described it the way engineers describe the things they love, not with poetry but with specificity, which is its own kind of poetry. The systems, the margins, the tolerance levels that existed between a successful mission and a catastrophic one, and the work that happened in the space between those tolerances, year after year, in buildings that the public never saw, by people whose names appeared on internal documents and nowhere else. "What did you actually build?" Stephen asked. "Safety systems," Gerald said. "Specifically the emergency abort mechanisms on the crew modules, the systems that exist to function when everything else has failed." "So your job," Stephen said slowly, "was to design the last resort." "My job," Gerald said, "was to make sure the last resort worked, so that it never had to be used. And if it did have to be used, then it would work," Gerald said simply. "That was the job." Stephen looked at him for a moment. "Did it ever have to be used?" "No," Gerald said. "In 35 years, my systems were never activated in an emergency." "Is that success?" "That," Gerald said, "is the definition of success. The thing that works so well it becomes invisible. The thing nobody notices because nothing went wrong." The studio was quiet, not the silence of boredom, the silence of a room that has just heard something and is turning it over. Here is where the story splits, and both halves are true, and the distance between them is the whole point. The first half. Gerald Ackafer had spent 35 years doing work that operated at the absolute edge of what human engineering could achieve. The margins he worked in were measured in milliseconds and millimeters. The consequences of error were not product recalls or lawsuits or bad quarterly numbers. They were 7 people, sealed in a metal capsule, moving at 17,000 miles per hour, with nothing between them and the vacuum of space except the systems he had signed his name to. He had understood this every day for 35 years. He had carried it with the specific discipline of someone who knows that fear, if allowed to accumulate, becomes a system's failure in itself. He had been precise and methodical and thorough, and had checked his work and checked it again, and had built redundancies into his redundancies, and had made sure, in every way available to him, that if the worst happened, the thing he built would stand between 7 human beings and the worst. It had never been needed. Nobody had ever thanked him for it. Because when nothing goes wrong, there is nothing to point to. The second half, every launch, Gerald's family had gathered in front of the television. His wife, his children, later his grandchildren. They watched the countdown. They watched the ignition. They watched the vehicle rise on its column of fire into the Florida sky. They cheered the way everyone cheered. And they looked for him. In the crowd of engineers at Mission Control, in the background of news footage, in the press conferences. They looked for the man they knew, in the building they knew he was in, doing the work they knew he was doing. They never found him. Because Gerald was not in the crowd. He was at his station, watching his systems, waiting to see if the thing he built would do the thing it was built to do. And when it did, when the vehicle cleared the tower and his systems remained silent because they were not needed, Gerald would look at his hands. Just for a moment, just long enough to confirm that they were steady. Then he would go back to work. Maya had watched him do this every launch for as long as she could remember. She had never understood what it meant. She had understood that it meant something. At 8 years old, she had written it down. He got very quiet and looked at his hands, and sent it into the world, and hoped that someone would know what to do with it. "Can I ask you something personal?" Stephen said. "You can ask," Gerald said. "Your family, your wife, your kids, your grandkids, every launch they were watching, and you were in the building. Were you ever on camera? Did they ever see you?" Gerald considered this. "Once," he said, 1998, A camera swept through the control room during a live broadcast and I was in frame for about 2 seconds. My wife called me from home. She said, "I saw you. You were looking at something on your screen." I asked her if she was sure it was me. A pause. She said, "Gerald, I know what you look like when you're worried." The audience made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. The sound of recognition. The sound of a room full of people who have someone in their lives who knows exactly what they look like when they're worried. "Were you worried?" Stephen asked. "Always," Gerald said. "Every launch. The job was to worry correctly, to worry about the right things in the right order so that nothing got missed. And when it went well—" "When it went well," Gerald said, "I looked at my hands." "Why your hands?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Because they're what I used," he said. "The drawings, the calculations, the adjustments, all of it went through these." He looked at them briefly. "When a launch went well, I looked at my hands and I thought, they held. Everything I put into them held." The room absorbed this. Stephen leaned forward. "Gerald," he said, "I need to show you something." He had not told Gerald about Maya's paragraph. He had not told him that it was the reason he was in this chair, in this studio, on this particular Tuesday night. Now he slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Gerald picked it up. "Read it." His expression did not change immediately, the engineer's discipline, the habit of processing before reacting. He read it once, then again. Then he set it down very carefully, the way you set down something fragile. "She wrote this," he said. His voice was the same, but something underneath it was different. "4 months ago," Stephen said. "Third grade. The assignment was one paragraph about what your family does for work." Gerald looked at the paper. "She said she doesn't know how to tell them." "That's why you're here," Stephen said. "She couldn't figure out how to tell them, so we thought we'd help." He nodded to the production booth. The large monitor behind his desk, usually dark during guest segments, lit up. What appeared on the screen was not a news clip. It was not an archival launch video. It was a video message, recorded that afternoon in a school in Houston in a third-grade classroom. On screen, 8-year-old Maya in her school uniform, sitting very straight in her chair, looking directly at the camera with the focused seriousness of a child who has been told this is important and has decided to treat it that way. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "I don't know if you're going to see this, but Ms. Reyes said maybe you will. I wrote about you for school because I wanted people to know. I know you always say your job was to make sure nothing went wrong and that's why nobody knows about it. But I think that's the most important kind of job, the kind where nothing goes wrong. I think you're the reason those astronauts came home. I just wanted to say that, and I wanted everyone else to hear it too." She paused, looked at the camera. "I love you, Grandpa. You can look at your hands now." Gerald Okafor looked at his hands. The room was completely silent. He looked at them the way he had looked at them after every successful launch for 35 years. The specific, private accounting of a man checking whether the things he built had held, whether the work had been sufficient, whether the hands that did it had been equal to what was asked of them. This time the answer was different from any previous time. This time the answer came not from a telemetry screen or a mission control readout, but from an 8-year-old girl in a school uniform in Houston who had watched him do this her whole life and had finally told him what she saw. He pressed both hands flat on his thighs. His jaw worked slightly. He did not look up for a long moment. When he did, his eyes were clear and steady, the engineer's discipline holding, but the room could see what was underneath it. The 35 years, the invisible work. The launches watched from a screen in a building nobody photographed, by a man nobody pointed a camera at, who had looked at his hands every time and never once heard anyone say, "I see you. I know what you did. It held." "She watches too many launches," he said finally. His voice was controlled, barely. The room laughed, the specific laugh of relief, of tension finding its release in something gentle and true. Stephen laughed too, pressing one hand flat on his desk. "She learned it from someone," Stephen said. Gerald nodded. "Once." The nod of a man accepting something he has needed for a long time. "Stephen," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you thank an 8-year-old for something like that?" Stephen looked at him. "I think you just show up," he said. "The way you always did, you just make sure she knows you saw it." Gerald nodded again. "I can do that," he said. "I've been showing up for 35 years. The applause that followed was the kind that comes from somewhere below the decision to clap. Spontaneous. Immediate. The involuntary response of 300 people who have just watched a debt get paid that was 35 years overdue. Gerald received it the way he received everything, steadily, without performance, without false modesty. He simply sat in the chair and let it land, the way his systems had let each launch land, doing exactly what they were built to do, quietly, without needing to be noticed. After the show, Stephen walked Gerald to his car, a gray sedan, practical and clean. At the door, Gerald stopped and turned. "The paragraph," he said, "can I keep it?" Stephen had already made a copy. He handed him the original. Gerald folded it carefully, put it in the inside pocket of his navy blazer, over his heart, without appearing to notice that was where he'd put it. "She's going to be something," Gerald said. "She already is," Stephen said. Gerald got in the car, drove back to his hotel, sat at the small desk by the window and called Houston, and when Maya answered, he said, "I saw it. I heard you." And Maya said, "Did you look at your hands, Grandpa?" "I did," he said. "Were they okay?" "They held," he said. "They held just fine." The episode aired the following Thursday. The clip of Maya's video, 41 seconds, a child in a school uniform, "You can look at your hands now," was shared more than anything the show had posted that year. Not because it was produced, because it wasn't. Because a third grader had written 4 sentences on a sheet of paper and meant every word, and somehow that had traveled from a classroom in Houston to a television studio in New York and found the man it was written for. Gerald returned to Houston the next morning. At the airport, he was recognized twice, both times by people who had seen the clip. Both times he thanked them politely and briefly and moved on, the way a man moves on when the acknowledgement, while welcome, is not the thing he came for. The thing he came for was folded in his jacket pocket. He framed it when he got home, hung it in his study next to the only photograph he had ever kept from his NASA years, a launch taken from outside the building, the vehicle rising on its column of fire, his building visible in the bottom left corner of the frame. Small, unremarkable, present. He was in there somewhere. He had always been in there somewhere. Now everyone knew. For 35 years, Gerald Acaffer built the systems that brought people home. His name was never on the screen. His face was never in the crowd. And then his granddaughter wrote 4 sentences on a sheet of lined paper and sent them into the world, and the world finally looked in the right direction. The invisible work was there the whole time. It just needed someone small enough to see it clearly.